She staggered, half-clad and trembling, through the dry, sun-baked earth, her torn dress clinging to what remained of her dignity. The Wyoming sun beat down without mercy, turning sweat and dust into a coarse mask over her skin. The men who had set upon her snickered and jeered, spitting near her feet as if to mark her as less than human. To the casual observer, it might have appeared chaotic or random, but to the Grayson family, this was deliberate. Justice, or something twisted in its likeness. No one dared intervene. No one even dared murmur. Sarah Miller was 28, and the weight she carried went far beyond tattered fabric. Her husband had succumbed to illness months prior, leaving her isolated in a town that saw her only as a liability, a mouth to feed with no worth. The Graysons had arrived not with sympathy but with retribution, making sure every neighbor, every passerby, witnessed her degradation. The blazing sun turned the ground into a harsh red dust that stuck to her skin, marking her shame like a second layer of clothing. She did not scream. She did not plead. Her silence became her only shield, a fragile barrier against the open cruelty around her. But within her, her heart thudded relentlessly, echoing in her chest like a war drum. The eldest Grayson, the clan's patriarch, leaned down from his horse. His gaze was unyielding, eyes like chips of flint catching the dying sunlight. A stream of saliva fell to the ground at her bare toes. Beside him, his two sons grinned with a predatory edge, their shadows long and angular in the late afternoon light. When they finally turned and swung back onto their horses, their laughter lingered in the air, a toxic fog. The town watched, some faces clouded with guilt, others twisted with approval, but none moved to intervene. No hand reached out. No word of protest rose to her defense. She stood alone, utterly exposed, crushed beneath the weight of a public verdict she never earned. Then came a sound that sliced through the haze of mockery. The rhythmic thud of hooves, measured and deliberate. A lone rider appeared on the horizon, his silhouette sharp against the molten sky. There was no hurry in his pace, no reckless charge, only certainty. Dust clung to his boots and the brim of his hat, to the tired lines etched deep across his face. This was Daniel Carter, 52, a cattleman who had long lived on the outskirts, more rumor than presence in the town's eye. He swung down from his horse with the quiet confidence of a man who had borne life's weight for decades, carrying experience like armor. He looked at Sarah once, with an intensity that seemed to pierce her very soul, and spoke. "Come with me." His words bore no options, no plea, only command. They were as solid, as immovable as the surrounding mountains. The crowd fell silent, held hostage by the tension of the moment, as Sarah's mind raced. What path had fate just forced her onto? Had cruelty ended, or had it only shifted into a new form? The journey out of Cheyenne was marked by silence. Sarah sat rigid in the saddle, the coarse wool blanket Daniel had draped around her a slight comfort against the harsh wind and the lingering burn of shame. She refused to glance back at the town. There was nothing left there worth remembering. Only dust and echoes of mockery, still ringing in her ears. As they approached Daniel's ranch along the Powder River, the sun dipped lower, streaking the sky with molten red, casting the land in a fiery glow. The river sparkled faintly, reflecting the last light of the day. His homestead rose modestly above the riverbank, a fortress of timber and stone, promising shelter. But for Sarah, the future was still uncertain. Would this refuge heal her wounds, or did it conceal shadows of a darker fate yet to come? The house stood weathered and steady, a quiet monument to years of labor and care. Its wooden boards groaned in the wind, the fence sagging slightly but still holding the few cattle grazing stubbornly in the yard. It was not a place of wealth or prestige, yet it had solidity, permanence, and ownership, and that was enough. Daniel swung down from his horse and extended a hand to help her descend, steadying her without a single word. Inside, the air carried the lingering scent of smoked wood and cold coffee. The furnishings were simple, handmade, and practical. Each piece had a weight and honesty that spoke of hard work. A stone fireplace, meticulously swept clean, commanded the room. Daniel indicated a door to the side and said quietly, "That room is yours." On the bed lay a cotton dress, plain, faded from years of wear, folded with care, clothes that once belonged to his mother. Sarah paused, feeling something she could not name. It was not comfort, not relief, but the absence of cruelty, a mercy in itself. Exhausted, she settled into the space, her body trembling. As she set aside a drawer for her few possessions, her fingers brushed something tucked beneath the folds, a folded, half-written letter, the ink faded with age. She unfolded it carefully and scanned a few lines before a cold shock froze her breath. Mr. Grayson, about what happened in Kansas. Her heart thudded. Kansas. The Graysons, the very men who had torn her life apart. Yet here was a letter connecting Daniel to them. Why hide it? Why not destroy it or burn it? Panic and confusion surged through her, making the small room feel confining, closing around her like a trap. That evening, Daniel laid out 2 simple plates of beans and coarse bread on the wooden table. He ate silently, eyes fixed on his meal, never asking her name. Sarah forced herself to chew, her mind louder than the crackle of the fire. Had she escaped one danger only to step into another? She glanced at Daniel across the table, the lines of his sun-weathered face unyielding, unreadable as stone. A chill ran through her, deeper than the evening air, as she wondered whether the man who had rescued her was somehow entangled with the very family she feared. And what, she thought, could Kansas possibly have to do with all this? The days that followed passed in uneasy quiet. Sarah kept herself occupied with chores inside the modest home, sweeping the plank floors, folding and refolding the cotton dress, anything to quell the storm of thoughts racing through her head. Yet tension lingered like the oppressive summer heat. One late afternoon, while standing on the porch, her gaze caught a lone figure on the eastern ridge. Motionless, the rider watched from afar, the sun casting long shadows behind him. Hours passed, and he did not move. Sarah's stomach turned. She recognized that stillness, the patience of a predator waiting for the perfect moment. When Daniel returned from tending the fences, she said nothing, but her eyes sought any sign in his face. There was none. That night, he methodically cleaned his rifle at the table, the sharp scrape of cloth against metal echoing through the quiet room. Explanation was unnecessary. 2 days later, the rider descended from the ridge, dust trailing behind his horse as he cut across the pasture straight toward the house. Sarah's pulse quickened as she recognized the face, one of the Grayson sons. He dismounted and reached for her arm, silent and swift. Panic surged, but Daniel reacted instantly. Despite his age, he moved with a precision and force that seemed impossible. The younger man was yanked off balance, a fist landing with a thundering crack. The encounter was merciless and brief. Within moments, the Grayson lay in the dirt, clutching his ribs, groaning, retreating to his horse. Sarah watched, stunned. The quiet, patient man who had rescued her now revealed a ferocity that demanded respect. He did not shout, taunt, or display pride. He simply stood firm, breathing steady, his control absolute. As the rider fled, Sarah felt the faintest glimmer of safety rekindle within her, the tiniest spark of reassurance since the horrors she had faced in Cheyenne. For 2 days, the ranch remained shrouded in an uneasy quiet after the confrontation. Sarah tried to convince herself that perhaps it had ended, that the Graysons had been humiliated enough to leave her alone. But deep down, she knew men like them never simply walked away. They retreated only to return with greater force. By the 3rd evening, the sky darkened with heavy clouds rolling in from the west, carrying the promise of a storm. Thunder grumbled across the valley, shaking the air with its distant roar. Sarah gripped the porch railing, knuckles whitening as she watched the horizon. Through the sheets of rain, 3 figures appeared, riders cutting across the pasture with unrelenting speed. The patriarch of the Grayson family led, flanked by his 2 sons, all 3 hunched over their saddles as the wind and rain lashed against them. Daniel stepped out of the barn, boots sinking into the mud, rain streaking his face. He said nothing, but the calm in his stance spoke volumes. He understood that this was no ordinary skirmish. Fists and brute force alone would not prevail. The eldest Grayson sneered from atop his horse, voice slicing through the storm. "She belongs to us. Bring her down." His words were carried on the wind, sharp, commanding. One of his sons dismounted, a coil of rope dangling from his hand as he approached the porch. Sarah's chest tightened. Instinct took over before thought could intervene. She dashed inside, seized the rifle that Daniel had left against the wall, and returned to the doorway. Her hands shook violently, the barrel wobbling as her finger hovered helplessly near the trigger. Courage was fleeting, terror consumed her entirely. The younger Grayson laughed at her trembling form, advancing another step. Then Daniel's voice cut clean through the downpour. Precise. Enough. I know what you did in Kansas. Those words struck like lightning. The father froze, eyes widening in shock. Even the storm seemed to pause, holding its breath. Confusion flickered across the sons' faces, but their patriarch would not meet their gaze. His hand twitched near his belt before falling away. In that moment, Sarah loosened her grip on the rifle, pulse racing. She didn't fully grasp the weight of Daniel's declaration, but she felt its impact, understood its authority. And the Graysons felt it too. Without another sound, they mounted again, mud splashing around them, and disappeared into the raging storm, their fury drowned by the relentless rain. The night passed, leaving Sarah standing on the porch, rifle still clutched, body exhausted from fear and tension. Daniel remained in the yard, silent and steady as the storm washed over him. She realized then that her survival was not owed to bullets, but to a hidden truth buried in Kansas, a secret potent enough to halt even the most determined adversaries. By dawn, the storm had spent itself. The valley smelled of wet earth and sage, the river swollen and rushing. Sarah leaned against the porch, fatigued yet oddly light, feeling for the first time in years that relief could exist without anxiety clawing at her chest. By morning, Daniel was already up, moving with the quiet efficiency of routine, repairing fences, securing gates, tending to chores as though facing down the Graysons had been no different from tending the land. There was an unspoken power in his composure, one that unsettled Sarah even as it reassured her. Over the following days, life slowly reclaimed its rhythm. Sarah ventured beyond the confines of the house, tending the garden, repairing torn clothes, and discovering a broken teacup tucked away in a drawer. She spent hours mending it, carefully piecing the fragments together. When she placed wild purple flowers inside and set it on the windowsill, the cracks were still visible but the cup stood firm, renewed. Daniel noticed, his smile quiet but meaningful, communicating more than words ever could. To Sarah, the teacup symbolized more than porcelain. It represented resilience. Life could break her, but it could also be restored. Healing was not about erasing scars. It was about carrying them with grace, transforming pain into strength. True courage wasn't always loud. It could be as quiet as a man who labored without complaint, as trembling as a woman clutching a rifle and refusing to yield, or as subtle as restoring a broken cup to hold new beauty. And in this fragile, scarred, and renewed existence, Sarah began to understand. Strength manifested in unexpected forms, sometimes silently, sometimes shakily, sometimes delicately. Daniel's quiet fortitude had protected her, his secrets from Kansas serving as a shield against a present danger. She wondered, was he a hero, or just a man burdened by shadows he could not reveal? If faced with the choice, would she have trusted him, or fled from the shadows of his past into a world already brimming with cruelty? The answer lingered, carried on the wind that swept across the valley, a whisper of endurance, courage, and unspoken truths.